The October wind carried dust through the plaza of San Miguel de los Santos, a forgotten village in the Bajío highlands of central Mexico, where colonial stone met crumbling adobe, and the only sounds were roosters and the occasional truck grinding up the mountain road. Maria Campos stood before the notary's desk with $2 bills in her weathered hand, her black shawl pulled tight against her shoulders, while the men in the office exchanged glances that said everything about what they thought of her. $2, the notary repeated, his moustache twitching with poorly concealed amusement. For the Iglesia de la Santísima Trinidad. It's all I have, Maria said quietly. Her voice carried the flatness of someone who had learned not to expect kindness. At 43, widowed for 2 years after her husband died in a mining accident near Guanajuato, she had been living in a single room behind her sister's house, cleaning floors in the municipal building for 300 pesos a week. The church had stood empty for 30 years, its roof half collapsed, its walls covered in graffiti and bird droppings. The archdiocese had abandoned it in 1994 after declaring the structure unsafe. The municipality had tried twice to demolish it, but each time the budget ran out after clearing debris from the front steps. Now it was being auctioned for back taxes, a symbolic sale really, since no one wanted the liability of a ruin. "Senora, you understand the building is your responsibility," the notary said, sliding the deed across the desk. "Any injuries, any collapse?" "I understand. You can't live there. It's condemned." "I know." He shrugged and stamped the document. Outside, 3 men from the cantina had gathered to watch. One of them, Hector Ruiz, owned the hardware store and half the rental properties in town. He was a thick man with gold rings on both hands and a face that had learned to smile while calculating profit. "The widow bought the old church," someone called out, and laughter rippled through the small crowd forming near the fountain. "Going to pray yourself rich, senora," Hector said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Or maybe you'll find the lost treasure of Cortez in the basement." More laughter. Maria folded the deed into her shawl and walked past them without responding. She had learned that silence was cheaper than dignity. The church sat at the edge of town, where the paved road dissolved into dirt, and the mountain rose steeply toward pine forests and forgotten mining trails. It was a squat stone building, built in 1698, according to the faded plaque near the door, with walls 3 feet thick and narrow windows set high like gun ports. The facade was Baroque colonial, carved limestone angels and saints weathered to ghosts, but the wooden door had rotted away decades ago, leaving only rusted hinges. Maria stepped inside and felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. The nave was open to the sky where the roof had fallen in, letting afternoon light cut through dust and reveal the devastation. Broken pews stacked like firewood, shattered plaster exposing stone, weeds growing through cracks in the floor. Birds had nested in the choir loft. The altar was gone, probably stolen and sold in the 1980s. But the walls were solid. She walked the perimeter, running her hand along the stone, feeling the cool strength of blocks that had survived 3 centuries of earthquakes and revolutions. Near the back, in what had been the sacristy, she found a section of floor that looked different, newer concrete, poured roughly, with a metal grate set into it. She knelt and peered through the grate. Darkness, the smell of earth and old water. "A cistern," she murmured. Colonial churches always had them, dug deep into bedrock to store rainwater for baptisms and drought years. She tried the grate. It didn't move, rusted shut or locked from below. That night, lying on her sister's couch, Maria thought about the cistern. She thought about the way Hector Ruiz had looked at her with that mocking smile, the way the whole town had laughed at the poor widow buying a ruin for $2. She thought about her husband, Tomas, buried in the municipal cemetery with a wooden cross she'd carved herself because stone was too expensive. Tomas had been a practical man, a mining engineer who worked for other people's profits, and died when a tunnel collapsed because the owner had skipped the safety inspection. Before he died, he used to tell her about the old Spanish mines in the mountains, how the Conquistadors had extracted millions in silver and gold, how the crown had taken most of it, but the miners had hidden what they could, stashing ore in caves and cisterns and false walls, waiting for chances that never came. They left fortunes buried, he'd said once, sitting at their small table after a long shift underground. Not because they wanted to, because they died before they could dig it up. Accidents, disease, revolution. The earth keeps secrets better than men do. Maria lay in the darkness and made a decision. If there was nothing in the cistern, she had lost nothing but time. If there was something, anything, she would face that problem when it came. Chapter 2. The digging. She started work the next morning, walking to the church with a crowbar borrowed from the municipal garage and a flashlight her sister had used for power outages. The October sun was already hot by 8, turning the stone walls into ovens and filling the air with the scent of dust and dry grass. The grate was fastened with bolts so rusted they crumbled when she struck them with the crowbar. It took an hour to pry it loose, her hands blistering and her back aching. But when the metal finally screeched free and light fell into the hole, her breath caught. Stone steps, descending into darkness. Not a cistern, a crypt. She sat back on her heels, heart hammering. Colonial churches had crypts, she knew that. Priests and wealthy families paid for the privilege of burial beneath the altar, close to God. But crypts had been looted generations ago, their contents scattered or sold. Everyone knew that. Still, her hands were shaking as she lowered herself through the opening. The steps were narrow and steep, cut directly into bedrock. The flashlight beam revealed walls of fitted stone, dry and cool, untouched by the rot and weather that had destroyed the church above. At the bottom, perhaps 15 feet down, the stairs opened into a small chamber, no more than 10 feet square, with a vaulted ceiling and niches carved into the walls. Empty niches, no bones, no coffins, just bare stone and centuries of dust. Maria turned slowly, disappointment settling like lead in her stomach. Of course it was empty. Of course there was nothing. She was a fool for hoping. Then the flashlight beam caught something on the far wall. A seam, a vertical line too straight to be natural. She crossed the chamber and ran her fingers along the stone. Not a seam, a door. A slab of rock set flush with the wall, so perfectly fitted that only the slight depression of finger holes betrayed its existence. She pulled. Nothing. She braced her feet and pulled harder. The stone groaned, shifted an inch, then stopped. "Come on," she whispered, and pulled again with everything she had. The slab scraped sideways, grudging and heavy, revealing a black rectangle behind it. The smell that emerged was thick and mineral, old air sealed for centuries. Maria stepped through the opening and found herself in a second chamber, much larger than the first. Her flashlight beam swept across the space, and she froze, unable to process what she was seeing. Stacks, rows, piles, wooden crates and iron-bound chests stacked from floor to ceiling, ceramic jars sealed with wax, leather bags that had fossilized with age, and everywhere, covering every surface, spilling from broken containers, the dull gleam of metal. Silver bars stamped with Spanish royal seals, gold coins in rotted velvet bags, religious artifacts, chalices, candlesticks, crosses, some plain, some encrusted with what looked like emeralds and rubies, clay vessels filled with uncut gemstones. A complete set of silver altar pieces, tarnished black but unmistakable in their craftsmanship. Maria stood in the doorway, breathing in shallow gasps, her mind refusing to accept what her eyes were reporting. This wasn't possible. This didn't happen. People didn't find treasure in abandoned churches. The Conquistadors didn't leave millions behind, except they had. She picked up a single gold coin, feeling its weight in her palm. It was thick and irregular, hand-struck with a barely legible date, 1702. The reign of Philip V, 323 years old. Her legs gave out, and she sat down hard on the stone floor, still holding the coin. Above her, through 15 feet of rock and the ruined church, she could hear the faint sounds of San Miguel de los Santos going about its business. Trucks on the road, a dog barking, children shouting in the plaza. Normal life, continuing in ignorance while she sat in a sealed chamber with enough wealth to buy the entire town 10 times over. She didn't know how long she sat there. Eventually the flashlight began to dim, and she forced herself to stand, to back out of the chamber, to pull the stone door closed again. She climbed the stairs on shaking legs, replaced the grate, and walked home in a daze, the gold coin hidden in her pocket like a burning secret. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay on the couch with her eyes open, running calculations that made no sense, trying to understand what she had found and what it meant. The treasure had to be reported. The government would take it. That's what governments did. The archaeologists would come, the historians, the lawyers. She would get nothing, or maybe a small finder's fee, and then she would go back to cleaning floors, while museums put the treasure in glass cases, and politicians took credit for preserving national heritage. Or she could say nothing, keep the secret, take only what she needed, slowly, carefully, one piece at a time. The thought made her sick with fear and temptation in equal measure. By morning, she had decided on a middle path. She would document everything first, photograph it, catalogue it, understand what she had before making any decisions. She couldn't carry it all herself anyway. There were tons of metal down there. Literally tons. Whatever she did, she needed to be smart about it. She bought a cheap camera at the pharmacy and returned to the church, moving quickly before anyone could ask questions. But when she reached the plaza, she saw Hector Ruiz leaning against his truck, watching her with that same calculating smile. "Morning, Senora," he called out. "How's your investment?" "Fine," she said, not stopping. "Funny thing," he continued, following her with his eyes. "I was talking to the notary. Seems odd, you buying that old ruin. Got me curious what you might be planning." Maria kept walking, but she felt his attention like a weight on her shoulders. She had been a fool to think no one would notice. In a town of 3,000 people, everyone noticed everything. Chapter 3. The Pressure. For 3 days, Maria photographed and catalogued in secret, descending into the crypt before dawn and emerging after dark, her clothes covered in dust and her eyes red from strain. She worked methodically, documenting every crate and chest, every bag of coins, every religious artifact. The scale of it overwhelmed her. There were at least 200 individual items, from silver bars weighing 30 pounds each to tiny gold religious medals no bigger than her thumbnail. She found documents too, sealed in waxed leather cases, inventories written in archaic Spanish, letters bearing official seals, a journal kept by someone named Fray Sebastian Moreno. The ink had faded to brown, but the words were legible enough. She read by flashlight, piecing together the story. In 1702, during the War of Spanish Succession, a convoy carrying royal tribute from the mines of Guanajuato had been attacked by French privateers near Veracruz. The silver and gold never reached Spain. Official records claimed the convoy was lost at sea, but according to Fray Sebastian's journal, it had been diverted inland, brought here to San Miguel de los Santos, and hidden in the crypt beneath the church while waiting for safe passage that never came. "The Crown believes the treasure lost," Fray Sebastian had written in his final entry, dated 1704. "God has preserved it for a worthier purpose. When the war ends and peace returns, we will use this wealth to build hospitals, schools, churches for the poor. Until then, it sleeps beneath the house of God, guarded by those who remember that earthly power serves heaven's will." But the war had dragged on. Fray Sebastian had died, probably of disease like so many others in those years. The priests who knew the secret had scattered or perished. The church itself had been abandoned and rebuilt twice over the centuries, each time erasing more of its history, until the final abandonment in 1994 left nothing but a ruin and a forgotten crypt. 323 years. The treasure had been waiting that long. Maria sat in the darkness, surrounded by centuries of silence, and understood what Fray Sebastian had meant. This wealth wasn't meant for kings or governments. It was meant for people who needed it: hospitals, schools, the poor. People like her. But above ground, the pressure was building. Hector Ruiz started visiting the church, showing up with surveying equipment and a clipboard, claiming he was interested in buying the structure for demolition and salvage. "The stone alone is worth something," he said, walking the perimeter while Maria watched from the doorway. "Old colonial limestone, good quality. I could pay you $500 for the whole thing. It's not for sale." "1,000 then, that's 20 times what you paid." "No." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "You're being foolish, Senora. This building is dangerous. Someone's going to get hurt and you'll be liable. The municipality could condemn it, take it from you for public safety. Then let them. He studied her for a long moment, his expression shifting from friendly to cold. "What are you doing here, really? No one buys a ruin to stare at it. What are you looking for?" "Nothing," Maria said. "I like the quiet." After he left, she noticed him talking to the municipal building inspector, pointing at the church and gesturing. 2 days later, the inspector showed up with a notice of violation, citing structural instability and demanding immediate action to secure the property or face seizure. Maria took the notice to the municipal office, where a board clerk told her she needed an engineer's assessment and a remediation plan, both of which would cost thousands of pesos she didn't have. "Or you could sell to someone willing to take on the liability," the clerk suggested. "I hear Hector Ruiz is interested." She walked home through streets that felt different now, hostile, watching. Hector must have spread rumors because people stared at her with new curiosity. At the market, the butcher asked what she was doing in the old church. At her sister's house, neighbors started dropping by with questions disguised as concern. "Is it true you're digging in there? Did you find something? Hector says there might be artifacts, old Spanish things." Maria said nothing, which only made the speculation worse. By the end of the week, half the town believed she'd discovered something valuable, and the other half thought she'd gone mad with grief and loneliness. Then the sabotage started. Someone pried open the new padlock she'd installed on the church door. Someone else smashed 3 of the remaining windows. She arrived one morning to find the stairs to the crypt filled with loose rocks and debris. Not enough to block access, but enough to send a message. She cleaned it up and kept working. She photographed the last of the artifacts and began researching prices, contacting auction houses in Mexico City and Guadalajara under a false name, asking hypothetical questions about colonial silver and gold. The numbers she received back made her hands shake. Conservative estimates put the treasure's value at between $240 and $300 million, a fortune beyond comprehension, enough to change not just her life, but the entire town's economy, enough to build the hospitals and schools Fray Sebastian had imagined, or enough to destroy her if the wrong people found out. She needed help. She needed someone who understood antiquities and law and how to navigate the impossible situation she'd stumbled into. But who could she trust in a town where Hector Ruiz owned half the property and everyone else owed him favors? The answer came from an unexpected source. Her sister's husband, Miguel, was a quiet man who drove a delivery truck and rarely spoke about his past. But one night, after Maria returned home covered in dust and clearly exhausted, he pulled her aside. "I know what you're doing," he said quietly, "and I know why you're afraid." Her heart stopped. I worked for the National Institute of Anthropology for 10 years, Miguel interrupted. In Oaxaca, documenting Zapotec sites. I know what colonial treasure looks like, and I know what happens when it's found. I also know you're going to need legal help, and you're going to need it soon, before Hector forces you into a corner. Maria stared at him. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I was waiting to see if you'd trust me enough to ask." He smiled slightly. "My cousin is a cultural heritage lawyer in Mexico City. She's honest, and she's tough. If you want to do this right, legally, safely, she can help. But you have to decide quickly. Once Hector gets the municipality to condemn that church, you'll have no leverage." Maria looked at her brother-in-law's weathered face and made a decision. "I need to show you something." Chapter 4. The Truth Revealed. Miguel descended into the crypt with the flashlight, and when he emerged 20 minutes later, his face was pale and his hands were shaking. "Mother of God," he whispered, "do you understand what this is? This is the Guanajuato convoy. Historians have been arguing about it for 300 years, whether it was real, where it went, what happened to it, and you found it in a church basement. What do? We follow the law," Miguel said firmly. "We contact the National Institute of Anthropology and History, we get the proper authorities involved, and we make sure you're protected as the discoverer. There are protocols for this, legal frameworks. You won't get to keep the treasure, but you'll receive compensation, recognition, and most importantly, you'll be protected from people like Hector." "How much compensation?" Miguel hesitated. "Usually," 10 to 15% of assessed value for major archaeological finds, sometimes more if there's cultural significance. He looked at her carefully. Even at 10%, Maria, you're looking at $25 million, conservatively. The number was incomprehensible. She sat down on the church steps and tried to breathe. My cousin can be here tomorrow, Miguel said. But tonight we need to secure this site properly. If anyone gets down there before the authorities arrive, this whole thing could disappear into the black market, and you'll have nothing. They worked through the night, Miguel helping her move heavy stones to block the crypt entrance, while his cousin Adriana drove up from Mexico City. She arrived at dawn, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s with steel-grey hair and a briefcase full of legal documents. She spent an hour in the crypt with Miguel, emerging with a look of barely contained amazement. This is the discovery of the century, she said flatly. Maybe the century and a half. We need to move very carefully. She spent the next 6 hours on the phone, contacting officials at INAH, cultural heritage experts and museum directors. By noon, the first archaeologists were arriving. By evening, the church was surrounded by official vehicles, and the town plaza was buzzing with rumors that had finally caught up to reality. Hector Ruiz appeared, of course, pushing through the growing crowd with fury in his eyes. "This is fraud," he shouted at the police cordon. "That woman has no right. This is municipal property." Adriana stepped forward with a clipboard and a smile made of ice. "The property was legally purchased by Senora Campos as recorded by your own notary. The discovery was made on private land and has been properly reported to the National Institute of Anthropology and History as required by the federal law on archaeological, artistic, and historic monuments and zones. Unless you'd like to file a formal complaint, which I would be happy to defend in federal court, I suggest you step back." Hector's face turned purple, but he knew when he was beaten. He retreated to his truck and drove away, and Maria never saw him in San Miguel de los Santos again. Later, she learned he'd sold his properties and moved to Querétaro, unable to face the embarrassment of having mocked the widow who'd made the discovery of the century for $2. The excavation took 3 months. Archaeologists catalogued every item, historians analyzed the documents, and metallurgists assessed the treasure's composition and value. The final inventory listed 847 individual artifacts with a combined weight of 2 tons, and an estimated value of $240 million. Fray Sebastian's journal was authenticated and published, turning him into a minor historical figure, a principled priest who tried to preserve wealth for the common good rather than royal power. His vision, delayed by 3 centuries, was finally coming true. The Mexican government, facing international pressure to show good faith toward cultural heritage preservation, offered Maria an unprecedented settlement: 20% of the assessed value plus a lifetime position as director of the museum that would be built to house the collection. $48 million and a salary in exchange for her cooperation and her story. She accepted. The museum opened 2 years later in a restored section of the church, its walls reinforced and its roof rebuilt with period-appropriate materials. The crypt became the main exhibition hall, climate-controlled and lit with soft lighting that made the silver and gold glow like captured starlight. Fray Sebastian's journal was displayed in a glass case near the entrance, opened to his final entry about building hospitals and schools. And they did build them. Maria used her settlement to fund a regional hospital, 3 schools, and a technical training center for young people from mining families who didn't want to follow their fathers underground. She hired Miguel as the museum's chief curator and Adriana as its legal counsel. She established scholarships for poor children and grants for small businesses. She bought a small house near the church, nothing grand, just clean and comfortable, and every morning she walked to work through streets where people greeted her with respect instead of pity. She was no longer the poor widow cleaning floors. She was Directora Campos, guardian of history, proof that patience and courage could turn mockery into justice. On quiet afternoons, when the museum was empty and the light slanted through the high windows, she would stand in the crypt and think about Tomas, about how he'd been right. The earth did keep secrets, and sometimes those secrets rewarded the people who refused to stop digging. The discovery had changed everything, just not in the way the conquistadors had intended. Their treasure, meant for a king's war chest, had finally reached the people Fray Sebastian had imagined. The poor, the forgotten, the widows who bought condemned buildings with their last $2 and found more than gold. They found proof that persistence, honesty, and faith in justice could rewrite history. And that, Maria thought, was worth more than any amount of silver or gold could measure.